Hello, welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for September 20th, 2012. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. Joining us today are Jim Clausing and Dave Gross, and I'm John Hogoboom. So first off, we're going to talk about, I'm going to jump right into, we're going to touch base on something we talked about before a few weeks back, ZeroAccess. And Sophos, the people at Sophos have released an article recently here about how many infections they're detecting relative to ZeroAccess. And it's up around the 9 million mark, so that's pretty significant. We did a story about this a couple of weeks ago, and I kind of wanted to bring everybody's attention to it because it seems like there are a lot of infections, and Sophos is confirming it here. So as of very recently, I think this is late towards, even though I cut it off here, late in September. They're just peaked over the 9 million mark, and they're heading towards 10 million very quickly. It's a very linear chart here. You can see it keeps going pretty much straight up. The majority of the infections are in the U.S., 55%, and Canada, Great Britain are some smaller slices here, and then it rounds out with other places. But for sure, English-speaking countries seem to be the predominant infection types here for this one. So I just want to let people know about that. You should go back and review that show that we had covered to look for indicators that you might want to look for in your network relative to it. And we talk about it frequently in the Internet Weather Report as well. There's some scan ports that are very predominant in our Internet Weather Report, and they're related to ZeroAccess. So take a look for that in your network. Try to clean up some infections. It's not very easy to clean all versions of it. Some of them are so integrated into the operating system that trying to remove ZeroAccess will basically kill your OS on Windows. But not all versions are like that. So, check your antivirus vendor for something that can help you clean that up if you have lots of infections in your company. Yeah,
that's worth stressing there a little more. And we had talked about it the last time we talked about ZeroAccess, that there are several variants of it, and one of the really nasty ones, even Microsoft says, you get stuck with this one, you're going to have to re-image. So,
yeah. It's a bad one. It's mostly engaged in click fraud, which is kind of interesting. A lot of them we mostly see are password stealers and harvesters, but for the most part, ZeroAccess has been a click fraud. I think in the article here, what I read is they're making about $100,000 a day, maybe, off of their click fraud activities with these 9 million bots. So it's a lucrative operation they have running here. And my producer just reminded me that the ZeroAccess show that we did, it was a pretty lengthy discussion because it was just Brian and myself on that day, but it was on August 30th, so you can go back and take a look at that one. The other thing I wanted to talk about really quickly before we jump into some other people's discussions is Blackhole Exploit Kit, which we've talked a lot about before as well. It's kind of a dropper payload. It's an exploit kit that a lot of spear phishing or phished emails will have a link in there. You click on the link, and it redirects you to a page that tries all these different exploits against your browser. And if any one of them work, it will drop a payload of whatever the person wants to drop on there. So we've seen Crydex, we've seen Zeus, we've seen ZeroAccess, we've seen lots of things dropped as a result of the Blackhole Exploit Kit. They just released a new version here that I wanted to make people aware of. There's a lot of important things to take note of about how it's changed here. So there's a few key things. In the previous, they had a fixed URL that we kind of all knew to look for. So you could look for URLs that ended in /main.php, a variable name equals something. And that was a pretty clear indicator that it was probably a Blackhole Exploit Kit landing page when you look in your HTTP traffic. They've changed that now, so you can basically make it whatever you want, as long as it ends in .php. They've also added some other features where it can randomize the URLs for if you want. So each time somebody new goes there, it gives them a completely different URL. That makes it really tricky for any kind of pattern matching type investigations on just the URL itself. It also prevents multiple downloads, and they're doing this to evade antivirus vendors. So a lot of times an AV vendor sees a URL in, their user's traffic. They take that URL, they try to go fetch it themselves. With this, they won't be able to. If that one user actually fetched it the first time, it becomes null and void. You can't go get it a second time. So that's we've seen some other botnets doing this as well, but this is a tactic that they're using to evade antivirus vendors from being able to get new versions of the malware and whatnot. And then lastly, I just wanted to point out they've updated the code so it limits the attacks to only those plugins installed on the target system. The old version of Blackhole Exploit Kit would just kind of shove everything at you, which was pretty easy for AV vendors to say, wow, this thing's trying everything under the sun exploit-wise, even though it might not even apply to this browser. Now they're being a little savvier in this new version to only try to trigger exploits on the machine that they think will work, because they have, if you don't have the Adobe Flash plugin installed, it's not going to try exploits for that. It'll only try maybe the Adobe Reader ones or only the Java ones, et cetera. And then one last thing here, we are seeing a campaign that's using a particular URL pattern so that people can do kind of modified URLs, whatever they want. People have started using this already. And we're seeing a campaign, I kind of gave a few links here as examples, where they use 3 words separated by either a dash or an underbar, .php. So you see deep underbar recover dash result, anybody underbar miss dash knowing. And they must have some kind of dictionary set. One of our other team members who's on the call frequently, Matt Kaiser, he's been doing a lot of research into this particular one lately. So maybe we'll get him on to one of the upcoming shows to kind of talk about it. And related to this, I know I'm really rambling away here, but there is a current campaign going on within the past day and a half or so. We've seen this before. It's probably the same guys with just using a new version of the Blackhole Exploit Kit, but it's basically saying your Sprint bill is now available online. We've seen them do it with AT&T as well and Verizon. Again, these are not from Sprint, Verizon, or AT&T. They're sending a fake bill to you with a very large bill. This one has $1,895 in it, which is going to make you go, what? I better click on this and see what the heck happened in my account, and then you're going to get infected. This particular one that we're seeing over the past day or so here leads to a Blackhole 2.0 drive-by page, which is dropping. Some vendors are saying it's Crydex, some are saying it's Zeus. They're both password stealing type botnet Trojans. So keep an eye out for that if you see that in upcoming in any of your emails. And with that, I'm going to shift over to Jim, and Jim has an important topic to talk about that's kind of hit the press over the past couple of days here regarding a zero-day vulnerability in Internet Explorer. So we have one.
Yeah, thanks, John. Last Friday, a French researcher, Eric Romange, started talking about this on Twitter and in the Metasploit IRC channel, and discovered that there was a website that had been used in the recent past, had some Java 0 days on it. So I believe that's probably why he was monitoring this website. But he found a directory that had a couple of interesting pages in there, and he started analyzing it and discussed some of his results on Twitter and then did a blog post. And then Alien Vault also did an analysis, which is where I got the graphic here. But basically, what was happening is there was an HTML page in this directory which would load another item. In this case, it was a Flash executable, but it could have been just about anything. In this particular case, the Flash object was encrypted, so you couldn't necessarily detect it as it was going over the wire. When you decrypted this Flash object, it did some heap spraying, so it put the shellcode in various different places in memory. And then other HTML element, the actual exploit. The vulnerability is a use after free issue. Basically, a piece of memory that IE thinks it is used and then thrown away. It still goes back and references those memory addresses even after it thinks it's freed it. It's a multi-step infection, but the vulnerability was one in Internet Explorer. This became big news when on Monday morning a Metasploit payload taking advantage of this vulnerability was released. And so Microsoft posted a bulletin on Monday or Tuesday and another one yesterday. They've offered a fix-it tool. They recommend you use the EMET, and I don't remember now what that stands for off the top of my head. It's some exploit mitigation something, or enhanced mitigation, I don't remember. But they've got a fix-it that you can apply. Basically, this vulnerability exists in Internet Explorer 6, 7, 8, and 9. Internet Explorer 10 is not vulnerable. But this was significant enough that Microsoft is going to out-of-cycle patch tomorrow, the 21st, to update Internet Explorer to fix this vulnerability. At last, the last update that I saw, there are at least 3 or 4 different variants of this that have been seen in the wild, different Flash modules. And Flash, as I said, is not necessarily required. You just need to get something in there that can spray the shellcode out into the heap. But there are several variants of this that have been seen in the wild. Indications are that they may have been used in some targeted spear phishing attacks. That's just based on some of the names of the pages where they've found the exploits so far. It doesn't seem to have been particularly widespread yet, but with the Metasploit module out there, it's relatively easy to take advantage of now, so Microsoft is taking this seriously enough to do the out-of-cycle patch, which is a big deal for them.
Okay.
Everybody should be aware of it. It does affect all except IE10, so anybody that's using Internet Explorer, vast majority of people using Internet Explorer are vulnerable to this. So this does make it kind of a big deal.
And it's across all OSs, it seemed like to me, like XP, Windows 2003, 2008, Vista,
yep,
Windows 7, so.
XP through 7 and, the server versions as well. The vulnerability is in IE. It doesn't depend on anything in the specific version of Windows. So, yeah.
So it seems like, I was going to say, the past month or so, we've seen a lot of out-of-band patches, it seems like. I know at least within the past 2 or 3 weeks, we had Oracle release one for their Java out-of-band. And I think there was even another one that I just can't remember now. But hopefully this is not a trend, that we're seeing a lot of these zero-day exploits that are really rapidly, the problem is they're rapidly getting integrated into Metasploit or other exploit kits like Blackhole Exploit Kit or Phoenix like we've talked about. So it's a little concerning, but those kinds of situations, ramp up the need for the vendor to put a release out of band.
Absolutely, and that's what these the Java 0-day and this one especially, because they were so easy to turn into working exploits, vendors have stepped up and been quick with their patches, which is a good thing.
Yeah, and there's not much that you can do to protect yourself against this. I mean, they are 0 days, and the advice of not browsing to places that you don't know and not clicking on strange URLs that you get in the emails and stuff are good, but still, it's hard to know what you're going to land on when you have one of these things. If an ad could serve it up or whatever.
Yeah, and that's the thing is it could get, if they manage to drop it on an ad server, and I know the folks that run those services have to be especially vigilant because they're the frightening scenario. Somebody drops it on there, and it shows up on the front page of CNN and whatever your favorite news source is, or whatever your favorite landing page is. So, and the initial advice was don't use IE for a couple of days, and then they came out with the fix-it, which helps, and now they'll come out with the patch tomorrow. But that's difficult to do if you don't have another browser installed, because that one comes with Windows. That's one of the reasons why it's still the most used browser out there. And Internet Explorer is deeply tied to underlying OS in Windows. There are times when you may be using the Internet Explorer engine without realizing it just from your basic Windows desktop. So.
And there are some snort signatures out there for this from the emerging threats group. So if you run snort in your enterprise and you want to try to make sure you're not seeing this, you could try that. I've looked at it. I haven't had any hits yet, knock on wood. I hope I don't see any. But it's something you can look for because I know a lot of people are concerned about that. So moving along, Dave has a story about the campaign trail. Something going on with elections and whatnot, Dave?
Yep, this is the season. Basically what's happening here is Trend Micro has done some analysis, and they reported it on their blog. There are at least 4 different malware apps that they've found that are targeting voters. There's a heated debate now, or division between supporters of one side or the other, and so basically what happens is there are these apps. One is called Obama versus Romney, and it's detected as an Android OS AirPush, and it contacts AirPush, which is a site that does adware. They push ads to your device, and it also collects information from your phone. It enables access course location, so it can get information from the GPS and stuff like that. Right now, it doesn't seem too harmful, but it's something that you should be aware of. That in this election season, when there's a lot of heated things going on, heated controversy one side or the other, you definitely want to be wary about what's up there. And these apps are not only available from third-party app stores, but they're also available from Google Play. Now, Google Play has taken them down at this point, but there are going to be others that pop up until they realize what's what. So there's a second one called Captain America Barack Obama 1.0, and that's a different kind of detection, but basically it installs a 3D wallpaper and a U.S. flag on the device. and it also references the location information. So it can get GPS location, cell ID information, Wi-Fi location information, things like that. And, so far these things are in the upper hundreds of times being downloaded from what they've estimated. So it's not a huge widespread thing, but, somewhere, approaching 1,000 downloads for these different ones. So, it's not totally insignificant. And then there are two others, Barack Obama Campaign LWP1 and Mitt Romney Live Wallpaper 1. Both, also download wallpaper. They both put up ads, and they do location detection. And on these last two, it seems like users can prevent the ad display by clicking on a specific URL and disclosing some information like their IMEI information and stuff like that, which is not something that you necessarily want to be providing anyway. But in general, that's the thing that you have to be careful of. I mean, these seem to be somewhat innocuous, but overall, you probably want to be very careful about these things so that, you're not downloading something that may be even more malicious in the future.
Yeah, we always see around these kinds of significant events going around in the world, like elections, or I remember the royal wedding, any other the Olympics. We see all kinds of campaigns, phishing campaigns, and malware centered around these types of topics. So not a new tactic, but it tends to work. That's what concerns me most. But
well, that's why I wanted to bring it up, just as a reminder. It's always good to say, hey, before you're about to download something that seems to be very topical, let's, maybe tap the brakes a little bit and think about what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, thanks for that, Dave. So we'll go on into the Internet Weather Report here. We'll take a look at what we're seeing over the past week or so, and changes relative to that. So first up is we saw an increase in activity on 5901 TCP. This is probably scanning for VNC. I don't know if this is an official registered port as a VNC alternative, but I know it's the second port on VNC, usually for the second screen option. So we've seen an increase in activity over the past few days here, and it's not a lot of sources, but the few sources that are engaged in it are very aggressive. Their sources are in U.S., China, and Indonesia primarily, and the scanning is pretty aggressive in little peaks here during periods of time. So if you run VNC, we always tell you this, if you run VNC, make sure you're filtering it, or if you can, use SSH tunneling. That's a little bit more of an advanced topic with your VNC, but try to lock it down and protect it to only those endpoints that need to be able to get into it from the outside, or block it completely if you can. VNC is notoriously targeted as a brute force type of attack type thing where they keep trying passwords over and over again, trying to log into your remote console, just like remote desktop protocol. So be careful there. The other thing we've been seeing kind of an uptick in, I think we might have talked about this last week a bit, some of the various types of increase in anomalies that we're seeing, but in DNS, we're seeing more DNS reflection attacks than usual. It's a notable finding. It's not particularly severe, but you can see that there's a bit of an uptrend here versus this baseline that we kind of had where we had periodic spikes here and there. Kind of was flat, but it seems to kind of uptick here over the past, I don't know, I would say, I guess this past few days here, maybe 5 days or so, 5 or 6 days. DNS reflection attacks, common problem. Whenever Brian mentions these, I usually get up on my soapbox and say, if you're running a OpenDNS resolver, stop it. OpenDNS resolvers are DNS servers that people have on the internet that anybody can ask them questions of and they will respond. You really shouldn't have a need to do that. If you do, I'd like you to rethink your strategy on why you need to do that. Usually, the only type of DNS server that should be really publicly accessible, unless you're a DNS service provider like OpenDNS, would be authoritative DNS servers, so that other people can resolve your domains. An OpenResolver will resolve any domain you ask, and people tend to get lists of these together, and they use them to initiate DNS reflection attacks. And basically, they can use your OpenResolver as an attacker against somebody else. So they basically ping-pong traffic off of you. So look out for that. We're seeing an uptick in that. Also, one other interesting trend doesn't really show well in this chart. There is still a lot of telnet scanning, port 23 TCP. A lot of this is scanning for your home DSL routers, other types of embedded devices, network equipment that have telnet as a means for administrative access. One of the ones we've talked about a lot on the show, the security camera DVR botnet, that one scans for 23 TCP. It actually uses that as a means on a lot of these devices to get in and take over them. So, again, block access to 23 TCP. In fact, any device that I have that runs 23 TCP, I immediately try to turn it off completely and switch on SSH and then only allow people that I want or endpoints I want to get into the SSH port. So I would recommend that strategy as well. Most of the sources, interestingly, that we're seeing this week are from India, and these are not relative to that security camera DVR botnet, but we're seeing an uptick in 23 TCP scanning from sources in India. So this might be a different botnet, somebody that has a lot of bots in that area working to find open telnet routers and other embedded devices like that. And I don't actually have a good chart on the DVR botnet. I'll let Brian cover that next week because he's been kind of tracking that one as well, and we have some researchers working on that one as well. So I don't have an update on that picture, but some of that might show up in here a little bit. So let's take a look at what we have in terms of the most probe ports. This is a chart showing the ports that are probed the most, not the number of people scanning them, but the volume of probes against those ports. So as usual, for 45 TCP, a lot of that is Configure stuff or other botnets that are trying to exploit the same vulnerability that Configure was using to spread. The 16471 UDP, 16464, 16470, those are all related to ZeroAccess, which we talked about at the top of the program. Again, if you see devices in your enterprise trying to make lots of outbound connections in these ranges, like the 16,460 up to 71-ish UDP, especially when they're making lots and lots of connections, tens of thousands a day, that is something that you should check into. It's probably a ZeroAccess infection. 1433 TCP, Microsoft SQL Server, that's typically scanned as well. 3389 TCP, Remote Desktop Protocol, a lot of the normal the things we see pretty frequently here. There is a worm called Mordo, which we've talked about in the past as well. Some of this might be attributed to that, but we do know that there's other botnets out there doing brute force scanning attacks against Remote Desktop Protocol as well. So again, if you see any activity coming into your network via this and it's unexpected, I know a lot of people use Remote Desktop Protocol to allow their telecommuters and workers get in. If you're not expecting that activity, you should really investigate your 3389 TCP incoming traffic, even if you do use it legitimately. I'd be very concerned. It's one of those ones that's targeted a lot.
Yeah, and if you've got legitimate use, tunnel it through a VPN or don't have it exposed directly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know there are a lot of smaller VPNs. A lot of big companies do that, which is a smart way to do it. I know lots of small companies, when you get like less than 100 people in a company and whatnot, they tend to not do that as much, but they should investigate. There's a lot of public or free VPN solutions out there. Yeah, absolutely. So I would investigate that if you're in that kind of situation. 22 TCP SSH, we see that all the time as well as 23 TCP, which is Telnet. That's the one that we were just talking about as well before with the India sources scanning it. And then 5900 TCP, which is VNC. So here you got your 3389 TCP and 5900 TCP, which are your remote desktop type of access, which really gives you nice interactive access to that machine. And 22 and 23 are your console type accesses. And then we've got botnet, rounding out all these other ones here.
Brian had pointed it out last week, but it's probably worth pointing out again this week that other slice does seem to be smaller. That DVR botnet had been making that get larger and larger and larger every week, and so.
That's right. And I'm sorry, I cut you off there. What was that, Jim?
It's nice to see that somewhat smaller again this week.
Right. And we have had our research team looking into that DVR botnet. They're making a lot of great progress, and I hope we can have them come on the show and kind of talk about what they've been finding. You're right. It is less, and it was less last week as well, which is interesting. Not quite sure what to make of that. If I put my tinfoil hat on and I think about the fact that school just started again, I don't know. Seems interesting that things started to quiet down on this botnet as soon as the college school year started up again. Again, tinfoil hat on my head. And then in terms of the most sources probing, so this is what ports are getting probed by the most number of unique IPs. It's the same candidates again. We're seeing a lot of ZeroAccess here. Here's a couple additional ports from ZeroAccess show up as well. You got your 445 TCP as well. The 0 ICMP is probably not security relevant. 23 TCP Telnet, and then RDP again with 3389. The 210 TCP, that is our DVR botnet. That's what it uses for its command and control. So that's one to look out for. And then 2715 is gaming related, and that's just from the Half-Life gaming system. It uses that, and it kind of uses a lot of scattered. That typically shows up because it's looking for servers out on the internet that for gaming. So this is not security relevant either. So that's what we have in terms of what we saw weather-wise.
Yes, it is interesting on this one that other than 445, the next biggest, security-related ones, actually the two, which seem to comprise almost a quarter of the chart, is the ZeroAccess.
Yeah. ZeroAccess is huge. I strongly urge you to look for it in your enterprise. We know there's 9 million infected hosts out there, 55% of which are in the United States. Probably most people who watch the program are in the United States. So that's about 5 million or so people, 5 million or so machines in the U.S. are engaged in or infected with ZeroAccess. So you might have a few in your network. So take a look if you can and try to get rid of them. Unfortunately, like we said, you might have to completely rewipe your machine for certain versions of ZeroAccess just because it digs so deep into the level of the operating system with its rootkit that it's hard to get removed. So that's our show for today. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at threattrack@list.att.com. This video program is available at att.com/threattrack and on YouTube. And an audio version is also available from iTunes or FeedBurner. You just search for ThreatTraq. And I'd like to thank Dave and Jim. And thank you all for joining us. I'm John Hogoboom. We'll be back next week with another AT&T Threat Track. Until then, keep your network safe.